you ever wish your day wasn't dictated by your health? Are you tired of being tired all the time, or is pain holding you back from enjoying your time with your family? Would you like to manage your symptoms holistically, but you just don't know where to begin? I am so excited that you're here. This podcast will help you understand how natural remedies work so you can relieve your symptoms and live a fuller life. My name is Penny. I'm an occupational therapist, past pharmaceutical rep, a mom, and a wife with a strong faith, and for 25 years, I battled through debilitating Crohn's disease. I took all the medicine and did all the surgeries that stole so much time with my family, but never truly healed me. I finally realized if I was going to survive this disease, I needed to open my stubborn eyes to alternative solutions. I researched how perfectly our bodies work with plants and a lifestyle that made my health less of a burden to my family and aligned so beautifully with my faith and my medical training. If you are ready to reclaim your life with holistic options that are easy to implement as a busy mom and provide relief that lasts, this is the podcast for you. All right. Hello, everybody. This is episode 24. This is Penny Sampler, and I am your host of the Becoming Natural podcast. And this week, I'm very excited to share with you that I have an interview set up with my sister, Wynne Marsh. And a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about food because I've gotten a lot of questions about people who are interested in how do we begin once we have a diagnosis? What food should we eat? What should we not eat? I made a statement about celiac and people being able to possibly eat the gluten or the wheat in Europe, and Wynne has celiac disease, and she corrected me on a statement. So I thought it was important to clarify, and she actually taught me a few things. So tonight we're going to talk about an interview on the difference between celiac, gluten intolerance, and a gluten allergy. But just a little background before I bring Wynne on, I was just going to say that she did not have the GI symptoms like you would expect celiac when she found out. She had migraine headaches, and then she also had a tib-fib fracture in her leg that was unhealing. She walked around in a boot, and she went back, and it wasn't healed. And simultaneously, she was working with a doctor thinking about her Hashimoto's that they thought she potentially had. So they kind of put together the autoimmune connections and figured out that she did actually have celiac. So she came around to figuring out and diagnosing her celiac, not from a GI perspective, but from a totally different perspective that I think is becoming more and more common. So with that, I'm going to introduce Wynne. And I'm just going to let you go to town as far as talking about the differences of celiac, gluten, and allergy, and then I'll ask questions when they come up.
Awesome. Well, hi, I'm Wynne, and I'm just a celiac out there that's done a lot of research and has information. I am not a doctor or healthcare worker, so just take everything I say with a grain of salt. But so there's three kinds of people that don't eat gluten. We've got people who have celiac. There's people who just feel better when they're on a gluten-free diet, and people that have gluten intolerance or gluten allergies. And they're very different. We all know what allergies is. You can have anaphylaxis. An allergist can diagnose that with a blood test, and that's something super scary, and you need to be really careful with that. And those people have to be really careful. Then you've got people who have gluten intolerance, and that is a reaction at the cellular level. It's not life-threatening, although I know people that have gluten intolerance and they think they're going to die sometimes. I mean, it's horribly painful. They have very similar symptoms to celiac in the immediate time, stomach aches, headaches, vomiting, all the GI stuff. But that's where it ends. It's right there. It may last for days and it may be miserable, but that's it. So with a celiac, we are having an autoimmune response to the food that we're eating. And it's your immune system mistakenly attacking the lining of the small intestine when it's exposed to gluten. So this leads to long-term issues like intestinal cancer, malnutrition, and for people that have autoimmune diseases, we know that autoimmune diseases breed additional autoimmune diseases. So once you have one, you typically have another. And like Penny said, I kind of came about finding out I had celiac in a roundabout way because I had a bone fracture that wasn't healing. I found out that I had osteoporosis, which then, obviously I had malnutrition. About the same time, I found out I had Hashimoto's, and a wonderful doctor that put it all together and said, you know what, we need to test you for celiac. And my numbers were just off the chart in my blood work. So, and that's, of course, looking in your blood work, they're looking at your antibodies, which is part of the diagnosis of celiac. But to 100% confirm, you've also got to have a positive biopsy. So you're going in there and they're taking a biopsy in your intestine, and all those little villi in there are dead, which then, causes the problems with the absorption and things like that.
So great explanation of celiac, but I want to take it back one step further. What is gluten?
Sure. So gluten, and that's an interesting question because a lot of people think gluten is wheat and wheat is gluten, and that is not true. Gluten is a protein that is found in wheat, in rye, and in barley. They are not one and the same thing. So there are people that can eat wheat, but not gluten, and gluten and wheat. So, for example, I have had because I continued after I had celiac to have some stomach aches and headaches when I ate certain foods. I had some testing done for some food intolerances, which are a little different than allergies. They're not anaphylactic, but they make you feel bad. So in doing that, I know that I am not responsive to wheat. So there are things here in the US and abroad where they have foods that that protein has been removed from the wheat. So Char, for example, is a brand it's a European brand of gluten-free items. There's crackers and breads and things where they've extracted that gluten protein from the wheat. And a lot of times on some of the gluten-free discussion boards, people get really upset on social media because they're like, how can this be certified gluten-free? It's got wheat as the number one ingredient. Well, if you respond poorly to wheat, then that's going to be a problem for you. But if your problem is purely gluten, then the wheat's not going to bother you. So I don't have a problem eating products where the wheat and the gluten have been separated. So like DiGiorno pizza is one, Char crackers, and a lot of people talk too about some of the wheat flours that you can get here in Oklahoma. Like the Amish communities make sourdough bread from their wheat flour, and there are some European flours that people say, well, I can eat products that have been made with flour from Europe. Why can't you? Well, it still has gluten in it. So if you have gluten intolerance, and they say gluten intolerance, but a lot of people, because of the way that a lot of people just have eliminated things from their diet on their own, and they haven't actually had testing done. So they know that when they eat bread, they get sick, but they don't know whether they're getting sick from the gluten or from the wheat. If you have the testing done, you can find that out. But a lot of people don't. So the people that can tolerate the flour that's made in Europe or the flour that the Amish people make, because it is from a natural wheat that hasn't been bioengineered like U.S. wheat has been, they may be able to tolerate that. But as a celiac, it's not okay because it still has gluten in it.
So bioengineered, that's a word I like to talk about. When and why do you think we started? It sounds like we just do it in the United States. When did that happen, and why do you think we did that?
So in the US, they started bioengineering wheat around World War II. And the whole idea was to make more wheat in smaller amount of spaces, to be more resistant against different bugs and things. So, we're all about making more money and making more product. And the Amish community still uses the original wheat seeds. They don't have bioengineered wheat. And in Europe, they don't use bioengineered wheat. They also don't use a lot of the chemicals and pesticides that we use here in the United States. So they just come out with a better, purer product.
I'd be curious if Amish have celiac.
That's a good question.
Yeah, difference in the wheat and the gluten. But I think what you're saying is that was my understanding until you had it, is that people think wheat and gluten are interchangeable, and they're not.
They're
And
not.
that's the difference between what we're talking about tonight. So, celiac, autoimmune disease, for whatever reason, you and I both have autoimmune diseases and our parents don't. So that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But with celiac, it is not necessarily treatable. You have to restrict your diet. And I know that you eat mostly, you have a great garden and you eat a lot of just God-made food. But there's products that are gluten-free. And when we talked about this before, that eating gluten-free isn't necessarily healthy if you buy boxed products that say gluten-free, because they're loaded with salt and sugars and all the other things that aren't gluten. So a lot of people are mistaken thinking if they're eating gluten-free, they're eating healthy.
Right. Yeah. Lots of people tell me, oh, I'm doing it for health benefits. And it's like, well, it depends on what kind of health benefit you're looking for and what kind of diet you're following. If you're doing it for health benefits and you're buying gluten-free cookies and gluten-free pasta and gluten-free flours, you're not getting that benefit, and you're probably going to gain weight because all of the gluten-free products, most of them are made with rice flours. So you're still getting that, just the starchy stuff, potato flours, rice flours, tapioca flours, but they also fill it with stuff. So to make it palatable, it's loaded with extra sugar and other things that aren't necessarily healthy. We eat fairly clean at our house. So, another thing I hear people say is, oh, I had to go gluten-free and it's so much more expensive. Well, the gluten-free processed stuff is more expensive, but really, if you're eating, natural meats, you're eating vegetables, you're eating fruits, there's no gluten in any of those things. And they're not any more expensive because you're not buying the quote unquote gluten-free version of it. You're just eating healthy food. And there's lots of good, healthy ways to eat a good, healthy diet. And it helps you in the long run. You don't need all the chemicals, you don't need all the pesticides and all the dyes and all the things that are in all the food. And, autoimmune diseases are diseases of inflammation. And the best way to reduce that is through an anti-inflammatory diet, which doesn't include all those extra sugary things.
And you explained to me too that, what is the purpose of gluten? Why do we need gluten?
We don't really need it, but in bread and what it does in pastas and breads, it is the thing that causes the elasticity and makes your bread spongy and chewy and makes it taste good. And if you've ever eaten gluten-free food, you'll find that breads and cookies and things like that are just really dry and crumbly, and it's really hard to overcome that because the gluten isn't there.
I think it's a interesting point, because I touched on it in that podcast, was that I avoid gluten-y type things, not intentionally, but I just don't feel good. I'm one of those. And I do not have a problem with sourdough bread. So I looked into that just very high level, and it's something about the fermentation of sourdough bread that makes it to where it doesn't hurt your tummy as much as I'm wondering if it has to do with the mother. I don't know. That's just
I don't know. But it's, sourdough is great for people who have gluten intolerance, or, they say that they feel bloated and yucky after they've eaten breads and pastas and things with wheat and gluten in them. But it is frustrating as a celiac when people say, oh, well, you can have this, you can have sourdough bread. And, we had an incident locally where a woman was selling sourdough bread and she was saying it was gluten-free, and that people were eating it and they were getting sick. And after some research, come down to the bottom line was it was not gluten-free, that she was under the impression that the fermentation process would remove the gluten, and it does not do that. So, people with an intolerance, that's great. People with celiac, if the gluten is there, the gluten is there. And whether you're somebody that is symptomatic or not, if you have celiac and you're eating gluten, you're doing the damage to the inside of your small intestine, your gut lining, whether you feel it or not.
And it has long-term ramifications.
Absolutely. I don't want cancer.
Okay, so celiac goes under the umbrella of autoimmune, and that's often confused with gluten intolerance and then gluten allergy. So let's go next to gluten intolerance and give us a little background on that. You've kind of touched on it, but a little bit more.
Yeah. So, I mean, gluten intolerance, again, it's hard to know unless you've had testing done, whether it's the gluten or the wheat that you're intolerant to. But it's at the cellular level. It's not life-threatening. But it can have, very horrible symptoms. You don't feel good. And they're very similar to celiac. And if you don't, a lot of people will just say, well, I feel terrible when I eat bread or I eat pasta. And so I'm just not going to eat it anymore because I feel better. And so they avoid foods with wheat in them or gluten in them. And maybe they do it for years. And it really is important to know if you have gluten intolerance or if you have celiac. Unfortunately, if you're not eating wheat or gluten, you can't be tested for celiac. So a lot of people who maybe have had intolerance and they quit eating gluten and wheat, and it's been years, and they go to a doctor because they want to know, if you test your antibodies are only elevated if they're reacting to something. And so you have to be eating the wheat. And same thing with doing the biopsy. There's no damage in your intestinal wall if you're not eating the wheat. And some people don't think it's worth it. And I have to agree, because you'd have to be eating wheat for a few weeks to be able to cause enough damage for them to be able to test you to know for sure if it is celiac.
So has your damage, you think, does that heal? Like, have you healed your damage by eating well over all these years?
It does. I get the pleasure of having scopes more often than the average population because my doctor wants to keep up with my celiac. But this last time, he said, we've done several. Everything looks normal, and so I get to go 10 years now before I have to have another one. But yeah, the only cure for celiac is not really a cure, but it's just a dietary change. And as long as you're eating 100% gluten-free, and that includes, the cross-contamination and little bits and pieces that get in from restaurants and whatever, as long as you're eating gluten-free, you're symptom-free, and you're not creating that inflammation that can lead to other problems.
Right. And on the gluten intolerance thing, I think it's interesting you say that people will just stop eating gluten like bread and all that because it makes them feel bad. And on the flip side, my husband has a family of diabetics, as you all know, and he says anything bread and gluten-y and all the starches and carbs make him feel bad. So it may be that you're not necessarily gluten intolerant. It could be that you have a metabolic disorder of some sort, and you just don't know until you're truly tested.
Exactly.
Could be self-treating, but then have something totally different because maybe he has a gluten intolerance, but he's, just eating carbs from his vegetables.
Right. And there are some great tests out there for food intolerances. There's also some that will take your money that will not tell you anything at all. It's good to find a really reputable test. A lot of doctors can do them through their office. The one that I did is called MRT. And I did that with my doctor, sent me to a nutritionist that offered the test in her office, and it tested for like 350 different things, and there were foods and dyes and chemicals, all sorts of things on the test, and it was really very helpful because I was still having some symptoms, and I was eating 100% gluten-free, and we were able to identify specific things. And the nice thing about the intolerance test, unlike testing for celiac, you don't have to be actively eating those things for them to show up as an intolerance. You either are or you aren't intolerant to those things. And they line them up in kind of your red zone, yellow zone, and green zone. And there's some very common intolerances that people with celiac also have. And I have the joy of having them too, is that I have trouble with cow dairy. I can't have soy and eggs. Very common for other people with celiac as well. But when you do those tests, when you look online at a lot of the tests, there's very mixed reviews on them. There's a lot of doctors that think they're silly, and they'll tell you that didn't tell you anything. Well, it does, because when I eliminated those things from my diet, I felt better. And so, I'm sorry.
Gives you a starting point.
Exactly. It was a lot easier than going through an elimination diet, because, I mean, there's so many things that we eat and so many things that are parts of things that it's not as simple as, okay, well, cheese makes me feel bad. Things go in things, and you don't know. And it was a great starting point.
You just said that, and it just occurred to me. I've had that MRT test. I need to go find it. I did that years ago when I was first having problems. Do those evolve and change over time, or is what you're intolerant to, you're intolerant to?
No, they can change. So after you've eliminated things that are in like your red zone and your yellow zone, I went for 6 months without eating a bite of anything that was in my red and my yellow zone. And then we just slowly added back some of the less reactive things in my yellow zone. And a lot of those things, after I had them, I was able to put them back in my diet, and I was fine. A lot of it just had to do with the damage that was in my gut, and I was able to eat them again. Some of the things, not. Cow dairy, no, no, no. It just does not do well for me.
Well, and those are really high level triggers. I think the common triggers for anybody with food is dairy, wheat, corn, sugar, or fake sugars for me. I know that my niece, your daughter, went through this, and I feel like you said like she had a reaction to cinnamon.
Yeah, and strawberries and peanut butter.
Unexpected things that she had. So I think it's important to know that it's not just like these 5 reactive things. Like the MRT takes it down to like really in-depth studying. And so by her, never would she have put together that cinnamon was a trigger unless she had seen that on a test. So I think that's the value in those tests, even though they maybe have a lot of false positives, they at least give you a starting point to where you
Absolutely
eliminate and go from there.
But definitely get a good test. I was just curious myself, because I noticed on Groupon you're doing a test that uses hair follicles, and it was like $20 on Groupon. And I thought, I'd had these tests done multiple times with my doctor and felt very confident in the results. So I thought, I'm just curious, because I'm telling people about the MRT tests all the time. What does this hair follicle test show? It doesn't show anything. Don't spend the $20, because the results were just so all over the place. And they weren't organized very well, and none of it wasn't correct. None of those things were things that I have ever reacted to. But the ones that have the chemicals on them are interesting too, because a lot of the chemicals that, the med spas use on your face for your chemical peels and things, those were all on my MRT test, and I was sensitive to most of them.
That is such a great plug for Becoming Natural, because those are all the things I'm trying to get rid of, is all those endocrine blockers that I'm trying to heal my thyroid. And I realized everything I put on my body was an endocrine blocker. Okay, so we're summarizing: celiac is autoimmune, gluten intolerance is not autoimmune and can be managed by what you eat and don't eat, does not have the same long-term detrimental effects as celiac. And then we move into gluten allergy.
So I mean, we all know what allergies are. You go to the allergist, they can do a blood test. They're life-threatening. It involves your immune system, and anaphylaxis, and that's trouble.
So that's where you got to carry a pen, perhaps an EpiPen, things like that. And I think it's one comment that you made that I have written down here is that gluten intolerance is kind of a catch-all. I kind of say that about IBS, when doctors don't know to tell you if you have Crohn's or ulcerative colitis or anything. They just kind of group you in this big category. So if they can't prove yet that you're celiac, or they can't prove an allergy, they just kind of give you that gluten intolerance title.
I agree. Yeah. And, one thing that we had talked about before that I didn't mention, and since we're talking about allergy, people do understand allergy. And, when I go out and eat in a restaurant, it's really hard to explain to your 19-year-old server that is already thinking about what they're going to be doing when they get off work and all the other fun things they want to do, that, I have celiac and it's really important that my gluten-free foods stay gluten-free. So we in our world, I know lots of people do it, is, we just say it's an allergy. It's important because everybody knows what an allergy is and they know it's important. Celiac is not an allergy. However, I don't have time to sit with a teenager and educate them on an autoimmune response to even just a speck of wheat that gets in my food. So we just say allergy.
Well, and I think that's the broader education because a lot of people don't know the difference between celiac and gluten-free and gluten intolerant and gluten allergy. And that was the goal for tonight, to clarify all that, because we know that we used to tease you because our dad is old school and he would stick a big old glutenized cracker in a dip at Christmas and
Yes.
glutenize the dip, and Wynne couldn't have it, and she would just be so mad at him, and he didn't understand because that's not their generation. They haven't had to deal with this. So it's relatively new that people are having to deal with it. So to have just even the dust for you is so sensitive that you could get a migraine very easily if you ingest or even around, right, any sort of gluten in your life, which is hard
Right.
other people to understand.
Right. It's like going to a pizza place. Domino's says they have gluten-free pizza. Well, that's great if you have gluten intolerance or you're just trying to avoid gluten. But a place like that doesn't have a separate prep area, that is throwing dough in the air and there's flour flying everywhere and it's in their vents and it's on every single surface top in there. If I were to eat their gluten-free pizza, which technically there are no gluten ingredients in the dough that they're making, but that flour is flying everywhere. I can't eat that because I'm going to get I'm going to get contaminated by that food. So it's important when I go to a restaurant that they make things in a separate prep area and they're changing their gloves and they're not using the same utensils, and anything that would have gluten or flour on it, they're not touching the food that I'm eating. And that's where it becomes hard to explain and where it's easier to just say it's an allergy. Please note on there for the chef or the cook or the server that it's an allergy. So, they can't bring your food out with croutons on it, for your salad after you told them that they had to leave those off and then just brush them off. And I've had servers tell me, well, just take them off, eat around them. I can't do that because there's crumbs in there. My food can't touch.
Going back to the World War II comment, one of our good friends is my GI doctor here in Kansas City, and thankfully I don't have to see him very often, but he had asked about family autoimmune, and I said that you had celiac, and he was like, isn't your sister a redhead? And I said, yes. And he said, that's very common among redheads because it is what'd you say, an Eastern European?
Eastern European. Mm-hmm.
And he said Irish, but it makes sense. And you were saying that, they're so much better at managing. They're so much better at managing the illness because it's been around a lot longer.
Yeah. And, I haven't been to Europe yet myself. We're going on a trip this summer and I'm super excited because I hear people who have visited over there talk about how easy it is to eat gluten-free in most European countries because it is something that they're accustomed to. And you don't have to go through this whole, I have celiac, it's, be careful with my food. They understand. And a lot of restaurants are just naturally gluten-free and they have bakeries that are gluten-free. And, if you go order something in a restaurant, you just tell them you have celiac and they're like, oh, we'll take care of it. So I'm looking forward to it being easy because it's not easy here. I feel like every time I go to eat out here, because we have a couple of restaurants that are 100% dedicated gluten-free, but not a lot. And so it's a lot of work to go out. And it's always a risk when I go out that something's going to be contaminated and, the next 2 or 3 days are going to be miserable.
I'm always fighting the fight against fake sugars because fake sugars were created for diabetics initially, and everything in the hospital is fake sugar. So when I'm in the hospital, it was miserable. It was the worst food that I could have. Do you think, with the research that you've done on gluten and all that, do you think that we're going to turn around? Is there any, I guess, the Amish, I mean, any OG wheat that we're going to start planting and we're going to return to a good form of wheat in the United States? Do you think that's possible? Have you read anything about that?
I haven't read anything about that. I mean, I'm not a farmer, so I don't really know what, I mean, I think in the world of food production, they're all about who can make the most product in the smallest amount of space with the fewest bugs and weeds because it's all about the pounds that they're selling. So I mean that's why we've gone the direction that we have because they can produce more, make more, um, in a smaller amount of space to do it. So I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of people changing, I mean, you and I are both on this deal where we're looking at all the chemicals that are in our food and the dyes and changing things. I mean, putting water filtration systems in our homes and changing the products that we use. And, I've changed all the cleaners that we use in our house and doing all these really radical changes. And then, when I start talking to people, I realize I'm not the only one that's doing it. A lot of people are making these changes. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if our food is going to change like that. I know in Oklahoma, they're trying to change some of the laws about some of the dyes that are put in our food. And that's happening on a national level too. But I know on things that are made in Oklahoma, they're trying to pass some laws about that as well. So, I mean, people are starting to figure out that your food isn't just a social activity. It is for our nourishment. And we have a lot of children in our country that have issues that they didn't have 50, 60 years ago at the level that we have now. And it's because a lot of the dyes and the junk and stuff that we're eating.
I've heard that. I've heard that when people go gluten-free with their children, that their behavior changes for the better and they don't have the ADD or they don't have the, like I said, not a doctor, just like, but that people have seen, I think moms notice changes in their kids the most. And when they go gluten-free, they notice a huge change in their behavior around the house and at school, and teachers respond to it. So there's something in our food. We all know it. We're getting down and dirty and getting there, but a very good lesson today on the difference between gluten allergy and gluten intolerance. So I know that we talked before, and Wynn's going to pull together a list of her favorite gluten-free products that you can buy at the store. She eats a lot out of a garden, but there are always things I know that I prep when Wynn comes. I think, what is it? Old El Paso is free taco seasoning.
Taco seasoning, yeah.
Be happy. And
No, I did not on my list. I didn't make an inclusive list of everything out there that I eat that is gluten free, but I looked for specific gluten free things on my list. So I made a list of like my favorite flour, my favorite cake mix, um, favorite cookie, favorite soup, things like that. The kind of the basic necessities that you're not necessarily gonna make yourself, and it's good to have a resource for one that is gluten free.
on the flip note, and you may have something to add, what you taught me is that I didn't realize when you buy shredded cheese that it is loaded with flour to keep it from clumping. And so
Sometimes.
yeah, and so now I buy, which is better for you anyway. I buy the chunk of cheese and I grate my cheese myself. Are there other products like that that you're like, oh, I don't buy that because it has hidden flour in it?
Yes. A lot of spice mixes like taco seasonings, chili seasonings, the things that come in the little packages that you add. I mean, things as silly as your salad dressing. You shouldn't have to worry about salad dressing, but you do. I mean, I have to ask about absolutely everything. I read tons of labels. cross contamination can also happen in the oil that things are fried in. So, if I go to a restaurant, if they fry anything other than what I'm eating in there, like Mexican restaurants, it's great when they say they only fry their tortilla chips in one set of oil and they have another thing of oil that they use for everything else at the restaurant, because if they fry those flour tortillas in there, the oil is now contaminated. And that also brings up another point. It's just all about education. I've had food managers say, "Oh, it's okay because we fry the corn chips first thing in the morning, so these are gluten-free because we put the other things in later in the day." And it's like, "Well, do you change your oil at night?" And they say, "No, but we do yours first thing in the morning." And it's like, "But it's the same oil. The gluten's still there." They also have told me, "Well, we get it to a higher heat. So because the heat gets so high, it burns up the gluten. Gluten doesn't burn up. So once it's there, it's there." So just lots of little things to be careful of. But yeah, I read lots of labels. A lot of things have changed since I became gluten-free. I mean, like the flour on the cheese, I hardly ever see that anymore. It used to be, like Great Value brand and some of those like things that you would find at Walmart were more likely to have the flour on them, and they don't anymore. A lot of them are using cornstarch instead of flour, but still it just kind of makes the cheese kind of dry. And I've enjoyed grating my own cheese. It takes a little bit more time, but man, it's so much better and it melts better.
Well, it's the education. I mean, I notice now there's less things with fake sugars that they're using cane sugar now, which I mean, sugar is far better than fake sugars for me. And as people are becoming more and more educated on celiac and gluten and all the different things, I think there's already more available.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even like canned goods, when I first found out I had celiac, um, there were a lot of things like canned beans, um, just a lot of canned products that I started canning a lot of my own vegetables for that reason. And now, um, you can buy most stewed tomatoes and things like that that don't have gluten in them anymore. Medications are another thing you have to be careful of. My account has been flagged at the pharmacy that I have celiac. But things have changed. I mean, like Synthroid, most people with celiac also have Hashimoto's, and you have to take thyroid medicine. And Synthroid was putting wheat in the medication as a filler. So it's like the people that need it the most couldn't get it.
So dumb. Back to the canning. This is why we all want to live on a compound with Wynne, because she'll can and have a garden. And I guess she's out of chickens now, but I'll manage the chickens and the fresh eggs. But yeah, we have a compound plan going in our lives. So thank you so much for your time, Wynne. And
Absolutely.
good things. And in the show notes, I'll get Wynne's list of her favorite products that she actually uses, and perhaps maybe add a few things to make sure that you avoid in order to be gluten-free. But I think the key takeaway for me from there is that in order to be tested for celiac, you have to be eating. You can't have gone without it and found out, "Oh my gosh, I feel so much better." You have to be eating it.
Correct.
That positive diagnosis. Well, thank you so much, Wynne, for interviewing with me tonight. I do think we learned a lot. I did, about the difference between celiac and autoimmune disease and gluten intolerance and an actual gluten allergy that can, cause anaphylactic reaction. And hopefully it clears the air for a bunch of people who don't understand and think that gluten and wheat are the same.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and for everybody listening, I'm going to make sure I attach Wynne's link to some of her favorite products that you can buy, and perhaps some things to avoid as well in the show notes. One of the best additions to my daily routine that shifted my understanding of holistic health was my USDA organic high-quality CBD oil. CBD is often misunderstood because not all CBD is the same. You do not feel this. This reputable family-owned company in North Carolina allowed me to get off opiates and live life without pain again. It is safe for ages 0 to 100 and can also help with joints, mood, sleep, future age-related annoyances, and so much more. You can check out my website at pennysampler.com, which includes $10 off your first order. I am incredibly passionate about sharing its benefits. If you would like personal assistance with selecting the products, please fill out the simple health assessment quiz in the show notes. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you've enjoyed today's episode, hit that follow button, leave a 5-star review if you're so willing, and help spread the message of Becoming Natural by sharing it with a friend. Check out the resources in the show notes and join the email list to stay on top of all the latest and greatest happenings at Becoming Natural as we roll out exciting new things while we grow. Until next time, take those baby steps to a more natural life and always give yourself grace. Progress, not perfection, is the goal. See you next week.